The palace press office released a statement in 2 short sentences that moved like a sudden tide. Following careful consideration, and with deep concern for personal well-being, senior officials confirm a significant and irreversible change to the public role of Princess Charlotte Helena of Westmoreland. No further details will be given at this time. The lines were clinical in tone, yet heavy with implication, the sort of phrasing that halts ordinary mornings and rearranges priorities. Within minutes, editors rerouted programming. Presenters stiffened, and the country felt a slow, collective shift. On the terraces of Westminster, a woman folded her newspaper and whispered that the palace never spoke like that unless something had been lost. In a small cafe near Kensington High Street, a barista read the bulletin aloud and watched the line at the counter fall into a hush. Across the Atlantic, dawn anchors blinked as the headline moved across their screens, before they pivoted, breathless, into speculation. What had happened to a young princess of the modern monarchy? A child the public had watched in gentle glimpses across summer lawns and family Christmas cards. Inside Clarence House, the printed statement lay heavy on the king's desk. Charles read the wording again, exhaled quietly, and felt the weight of responsibility settle like cold stone. This was not administrative housekeeping. It was a family decision encoded in institutional language. A rare moment when the palace placed private protection above public appetite. William arrived moments later, the gravity of the morning etched into his posture. He had argued for clarity, for a statement that left no space for wild interpretation. He knew how rapidly rumor could harden into belief, and how difficult it became to reverse a narrative once it had taken root in public imagination. But the truth behind the 2 sentences was far more layered. It represented months of small accumulations, absences quietly noted by attentive aides, gentle alterations to Charlotte Helena's routine, and a series of nights when curtains were drawn earlier than usual. It reflected hushed conversations in private sitting rooms, where guardians confessed worry, where senior staff weighed the emotional cost of another season under a relentless public lens. For those within the household, the announcement was not a shock. It was the inevitable conclusion to a long, sorrowful vigil. Outside palace walls, journalists speculated, and social feeds erupted with conjecture. Yet none of that noise penetrated the hush inside the royal residences. Beatrice and Eugenie, who had been informed the night before, left their phones unanswered as they attempted to absorb the implications. They adored their younger sister, had watched her grow with both pride and a quiet protectiveness, and now they carried the heavy knowledge that the institution had chosen shelter over spectacle. In the palace's drawing rooms, long-serving aides moved with measured pace, coordinating with charities, reassessing upcoming duties, drafting letters of reassurance for partners who would feel the absence deeply. There was a painful elegance in how the palace handled the announcement. It did not dramatize. It did not cloak itself in emotional language. It simply used the tools of restraint, precise timing, measured phrasing, a signature of concern to draw a line between what the public wished to know and what the child deserved to keep. That restraint, however, signaled its own urgency. It told the kingdom that something private and fragile had reached a moment where silence could no longer protect her unless accompanied by decisive action. The statement became, in effect, the palace intervening before tender truth could be reshaped into rampant speculation. By late morning, a sober conversation had settled across the nation. Viewers who once approached royal families with a blend of curiosity and affection now responded with something deeper: protectiveness. Analysts discussed the impossible balance of raising children within an institution defined by visibility while attempting to preserve the sanctity of their emotional development. And within the palace, the family shifted into a stance of unity and care, aware that the coming weeks would demand patience, privacy, and unwavering steadiness. For the nation, the announcement read not as scandal, but as a solemn reminder that even the most sheltered young lives were not immune to strain, and that true compassion, especially from those who wield influence, sometimes looks very much like stepping back. The shadow that built the storm. To understand how the palace reached a point where it could no longer remain silent, we must return to the slow-moving undercurrent that had been gathering beneath the surface since early autumn. It began with small, almost forgettable details. Princess Charlotte Helena, once bright-eyed and endlessly curious during public appearances, began withdrawing into herself during engagements. Where she had once clung softly to her father's hand at charitable visits, she now stood further back, her gaze lowered and shoulders drawn inward, as though listening to a sound no one else could hear. A single adjustment might have been dismissed as shyness, but the pattern grew gradually and painfully undeniable. In mid-October, during a visit to a children's literacy project, observers noted a subtle tremor in her hands as she accepted a book. By the end of that event, she had excused herself quietly, guided away by a senior aide with a look that was half concern, half urgency. The palace released no explanation then. They rarely did. But William's expression afterward, a tightness around the eyes, a stillness in his voice, told those who knew him that something was wrong, and was the first within the family to speak bluntly. She had watched Charlotte Helena during a private tea gathering and noticed how the girl flinched at sudden noise, how she seemed to brace herself whenever conversations around her grew animated, and had weathered her own share of public scrutiny and carried within her a sharp instinct for emotional strain. "The child is not thriving," she had said quietly to Charles afterward, and unlike many within the institution, and never overstated a concern. By late October, medical guidance was sought discreetly. Specialists advised what no royal wanted to hear. The princess needed space, real, sustained space, away from cameras, expectations, and the weight of symbolic duty. Her nervous system showed signs of overwhelming strain, the kind that, if left unaddressed, could shape a lifetime. The recommendation was absolute: reduce her public role immediately. William and Catherine listened with still hearts. They had suspected as much. Parents often sense decline long before it becomes visible to others. Catherine, recovering still from her own difficult months, understood intimately what it meant for the body and mind to buckle beneath relentless attention. The prospect of withdrawing Charlotte Helena from the public, I felt both heartbreaking and necessary. Yet stepping back a child born into royalty is never simple. Every decision must be balanced against public expectation, institutional precedent, and media interpretation. And just as the family began quietly planning how to ease Charlotte Helena into a gentler routine, the situation took an unexpected turn, one fueled not by internal strain, but by forces outside palace walls. In early November, American digital networks, hungry for holiday content, began circulating speculative stories about the young princess. Her recent absences, her quieter demeanor, her shortened appearances, all became fodder for dramatic analysis. A particular podcast episode suggested she was being groomed for an expanded future role due to shifting royal dynamics. Another source invented entirely new reasons for her withdrawal, each more sensational than the last. None were rooted in truth. The tipping point came when an influencer with a substantial following made claims that Charlotte Helena was being prepared for unprecedented responsibilities. The palace watched as false narratives spread with frightening speed, seeping into British outlets and sparking debates about lineage and duty. It was the same cycle the monarchy had faced before. Misinterpretation transforming into speculation, speculation twisting into perceived truth. For William, this was the final warning. He knew what misinformation could do when left unchecked. He had seen it rewrite public memory, fracture family ties, and create storms that took years to calm. And now, the swirling rumors were no longer targeting adults accustomed to scrutiny. They were encircling a child already battling private fragility. Catherine urged decisiveness, and agreed without hesitation. Even Camilla, who had learned over many difficult decades how narratives can mutate, insisted the palace intervene before the girl's well-being was devoured by the machinery of modern speculation. Thus, the foundation for the dawn announcement was laid, not by crisis alone, but by a convergence of sorrow, protection, and the bitter recognition that in the age of relentless commentary, silence was no longer a shield. It was a danger. Inside the night, the family broke its silence. The turning point arrived on the night of November 26th, a night carved by frost and tension, when the palace finally acknowledged that silence had become a liability. The family gathered in the blue drawing room at Windsor, a place usually reserved for formal photographs and diplomatic greetings, not family reckonings. Yet on that evening, the atmosphere felt stripped of ceremony. The lamps glowed low. The air carried a chill that not even the roaring fireplace could soften. And at the center of the room stood a single folder, thin, unassuming, but heavy with consequences. William was the first to speak. He had returned from a full day of engagements, but the fatigue in his eyes came not from duty, but from fear. He placed the folder on the table and looked toward his father, then to his aunt. "This is no longer manageable," he said quietly. Every hour we delay, she becomes more exposed. Charles nodded slowly. He had spent the past weeks wrestling with equal parts sorrow and responsibility, torn between the instinct to protect his granddaughter and the burden of safeguarding an institution that had survived centuries. "What are the alternatives?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. The folder contained a series of escalating analyses. Media patterns, psychological recommendations, and detailed accounts of how speculation was spiraling. One page tracked the spread of misinformation across 4 continents, revealing how quickly false narratives were eclipsing truth. Another reported direct inquiries from foreign press offices, asking whether the princess was preparing for new ceremonial duties. And at the very bottom lay the most troubling document, a specialist note advising that Charlotte Helena's nervous system was registering prolonged stress responses. Catherine, though still maintaining a reduced schedule, had joined the meeting via secure call. Her voice, gentle yet unwavering, came through the speakers with clarity. "She needs protection, not expectation," she said. "We cannot allow her to be pulled into another cycle of scrutiny. Not now, not at her age." Her words were met with a silence thick with unspoken agreement. And, ever the guardian of discipline and duty, leaned forward. "We have waited too long already," she said, her tone firm. "If we do not act decisively, others will fill the silence with their own stories, and they already have." She tapped the folder. "This is not speculation anymore. It is a pattern, a coordinated surge. That means someone, somewhere, benefits from her being discussed, and, whether intentional or not, the damage lands on her shoulders." Camilla, who had joined quietly and listened without interruption, finally spoke. "Children do not choose the burdens placed on them," she said softly. "But adults must choose how much they allow those burdens to grow." Her gaze drifted toward the window where the silhouettes of bare winter trees stood against the night. "If the public begins to think the palace is hiding something, they will push harder. We cannot let that pressure find its way to her." William exhaled slowly. "Then we make it clear," he said. "She will step back from public duties indefinitely. We will prioritize her well-being, not appearances." The statement must be firm, brief, and unmistakable. It was not an easy decision. Royal children were often protected, yes, but rarely withdrawn so completely. The public felt entitled to glimpses of them. Birthdays, school milestones, balcony waves. That expectation had been woven into the monarchy's relationship with its people for generations. But Charlotte Helena was not a symbol to be polished. She was a child who needed quiet, not spectacle. Charles finally spoke with a tremor of age and resolve. "We will do it at dawn," he said. "No embellishment, no apology, just the truth." His voice carried both authority and heartbreak. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that the world would allow his granddaughter's space to grow without becoming another battleground for narratives. But hope was no match for the speed and reach of modern scrutiny. As the meeting dissolved, the weight of the decision lingered in the room. Aides moved swiftly to draft the phrasing. Courtiers coordinated internal protocols. The clocks of Windsor ticked into the early hours, each second drawing closer to a statement that would redefine the young princess's future. Outside, winter pressed against the castle walls, indifferent to the turmoil within. And yet, within that cold, the family found a single point of unity, a shared determination to protect a vulnerable child from a world that demanded too much from those too young to give it. The reaction that shook the kingdom. When the dawn announcement finally reached the public on November 27th, it moved like a shockwave through every corner of the United Kingdom. There was no scandal, no controversy, no dramatic accusation, only the sobering confirmation that Princess Charlotte Helena of Westmoreland would step back indefinitely from all public engagement. It was a rare kind of royal message, one that asked not for celebration or loyalty, but for compassion. And yet, the stillness it produced across the kingdom was heavier than any commotion. For decades, the monarchy had mastered the art of ceremonial distance, projecting dignity while remaining shielded from emotional critique. But the revelation that a child barely entering her second decade of life needed such decisive protection pierced through that distance. Reporters, who usually spoke with brisk professionalism, adopted somber tones as they read the statement aloud. Analysts shifted from speculation to empathy, acknowledging the delicate balance between public fascination and personal vulnerability. In Edinburgh, An elderly listener called into a morning radio show, her voice trembling as she described seeing the young princess during a summer event earlier that year. "She looked overwhelmed," the woman said gently, "as if the world was too loud for her. I hoped she would be allowed to grow in peace." Similar sentiments echoed from Cardiff, Belfast, Manchester, and small coastal towns where residents rarely agreed on royal matters. On this, however, unity formed effortlessly. The child deserved space. Newsrooms across Europe and North America reacted just as swiftly. French papers described the statement as an unprecedented act of emotional clarity. In Germany, commentators praised the palace for choosing well-being over tradition. Even in the United States, where royal narratives often become entertainment fodder, talk show hosts approached the subject with rare restraint. "Whatever differences we have with the monarchy," one anchor said, "a child should never carry the weight of global attention." But while the international response leaned toward sympathy, the online sphere ignited with its usual volatility. Some claimed the palace had acted too late. Others insisted the public should have been warned earlier, while small pockets of commentators spun new theories, weaving fiction into fact with alarming ease. It was precisely this digital chaos that the palace feared most. Narratives that could spiral wildly, reaching the princess herself in ways no adult could truly shield her from. Inside Kensington Palace, William monitored the unfolding reaction with quiet intensity. He was grateful for the compassion he saw, but he recognized the darker currents too. Rumors, however baseless, did not merely exist, they multiplied. And although the statement was designed to protect Charlotte Helena, its very existence risked drawing more attention to her. Catherine, still recovering her own strength, understood the paradox intimately. She had endured years of intrusive speculation, but this involved a child, their child, and the stakes felt immeasurably higher. And meanwhile, resumed her engagements with renewed resolve. She refused to entertain media questions beyond the official statement, offering instead a level gaze that signaled boundaries not to be crossed. Those who knew her well said she was fiercer in her protection of Charlotte Helena than she had been of any royal child in decades. It was personal for her. She recognized what pressure could do to someone unprepared for its weight. Camilla withdrew from public commentary entirely, spending the day at Clarence House in reflective silence. She had learned through her own difficult chapters how narratives could distort a person's life. Watching a young girl face the risk of similar distortions awakened a deep empathetic ache within her. She offered her support privately through messages to Catherine and quiet conversations with Charles. By evening, Britain felt subdued. The streetlights glowed over pavements slick with cold rain, and people walked a little slower, conversations softer, as if collectively absorbing the fragility of youth under a powerful spotlight. For all the monarchy's centuries of tradition, shields, rituals, and protocols, there remained one truth that echoed through households across the realm. Titles do not protect children. Care does. And for the first time in a long while, the kingdom understood that the royal family was not simply withdrawing a princess from public life. They were choosing to save a childhood before it slipped away. The private cost of public duty. While the world responded with speculation, sympathy, or critique, the true weight of the palace's decision settled most heavily behind closed doors, on the people whose lives had been intertwined with Princess Charlotte Helena's growth since her earliest days. For them, the announcement was not merely a public recalibration. It was the end of a chapter that had quietly defined years of careful nurturing, quiet routines, and the constant, delicate balancing act of raising a child in the crosswinds of modern monarchy. Within the private apartments at Kensington Palace, the atmosphere altered almost immediately. Corridors once filled with staff movement slowed to a near stillness. Long-serving aides who had watched Charlotte Helena toddle down the hallways with plush toys in hand found themselves sorting through schedules that would now remain empty indefinitely. Her handwriting club, her small environmental initiative, her twice-yearly symbolic appearances, each was quietly suspended or reassigned. The hush that followed felt not like efficiency, but like mourning. Her governess, a woman who had served the family for nearly a decade, carried the news with a particular heaviness. She had witnessed the first signs of strain long before the public ever would. The shortened attention, the sudden shyness, the reluctance to face crowds that once delighted her. When she spoke to William and Catherine privately, she did so with the gentle, aching honesty of someone who understood the pressures of royal childhood all too well. She needs a world smaller than this, she had said. Smaller, quieter, kinder. Her counsel had helped solidify what the doctors advised and what parental instinct had already warned. But knowing the right choice does not make it easier. Catherine, though healing steadily from her own turbulent season, felt a tremor of guilt that she could not suppress. She had spent the past year navigating waves of public scrutiny that had reached beyond her control. And as she watched her daughter's fragile resilience, she wondered whether her own struggles had unintentionally cast shadows Charlotte Helena could not outrun. William reassured her again and again, though the reassurance carried its own weariness. "This is not your fault," he told her. "This is the weight of all of this, the world, the noise, the expectation." Yet beneath his composure lay a father's deep fear, one he kept tucked behind steady posture and measured words. In Windsor, Charles received updates throughout the day. Each message, though factual, struck him with emotional force. He had always considered Charlotte Helena a bright spark, a child who carried both the quiet dignity of her lineage and the curiosity of a new generation. The idea that the crown had inadvertently contributed to the erosion of her sense of safety pressed into him with a sorrow he had not anticipated. He retreated to his study for much of the afternoon, where advisors chose to leave him undisturbed. He needed time, not as king, but as grandfather, and approached the situation with her characteristic pragmatism. Yet even she was not immune to its impact. During a private walk around the Windsor grounds, she confessed to a close aide that children should never inherit the consequences of adults' battles. "We have too often allowed public appetite to define their childhood," she said. "We cannot repeat that mistake." Her voice, though steady, carried a thread of anger directed not at any one figure, but at the relentless machinery of speculation that engulfed the family each year. Even Beatrice and Eugenie felt the weight in their own lives. They had been among the first to sense Charlotte Helena's growing discomfort. Small things a parent might miss in the moment, but a sister might catch. A pause during a family gathering, a sudden withdrawal from group games, a quiet plea to leave a room when chatter grew too loud. Their hearts ached not only for their sister, but for the future she might now have to reconstruct without the scaffolding of normalcy she once enjoyed. And then there was Charlotte Helena herself. Shielded from the public storm, but not entirely immune to its tremors, she faced a world that had shifted abruptly without her choosing. Adults spoke in hushed tones. Routines changed. Her often practiced wave from the palace steps was gently discouraged. Days became slower, gentler, quieter. And though she did not fully understand the magnitude of what had occurred, she sensed, with the instinct particular to children, that something had ended. For the palace, duty had required courage. For the family, love required sacrifice. But for a young girl learning to navigate her place in a world wider and louder than she could bear, this decision represented something far more profound. The fragile beginning of reclaiming a childhood that had almost slipped beyond reach. The future the palace never expected. As evening descended over London, a muted amber glow washed across the stone walls of Buckingham Palace, softening the sharpness of a day that had carried more emotional weight than any royal announcement in recent memory. The kingdom had spent the last 12 hours absorbing the news, trying to reconcile the image of Princess Charlotte Helena of Westmoreland, the poised, soft-spoken child glimpsed at holidays and ceremonies, with the reality that her future had now taken an unexpected and irreversible turn. Yet, while the public wrestled with sadness and speculation, the palace shifted into something far more fragile: the work of rebuilding a young girl's life. Inside the palace's private wing, senior advisors gathered for a late briefing, designed not to manage public reaction, but to reimagine the princess's long-term trajectory. The conversation was gentle but unflinching. There would be no return to the spotlight for the foreseeable future. Her public profile, once carefully nurtured through small, age-appropriate tasks, would be reduced to almost nothing. Her schooling would transition privately, without press appearances. Her presence at major royal events, birthdays, national holidays, even balcony moments, would be suspended indefinitely. It was not punishment. It was protection. William sat quietly at the head of the table, listening as advisors outlined what her new routines would look like. There was talk of counseling, of creative outlets, of structured days designed to restore confidence rather than shape public perception. There was even a proposal to spend part of the winter months in the countryside, where she could wake to birdsong instead of the hum of city life. A childhood regained, as much as any royal child could ever reclaim it. Still, the decisions weighed on him. He had spent his life navigating the tightrope between duty and fatherhood. Now it felt as though the rope had frayed beneath him. Protecting his daughter meant stepping into a new kind of leadership, one that chose compassion over tradition and privacy over the institution's centuries-old reliance on public visibility. His jaw tightened slightly, a small, involuntary sign of the emotional calculus unfolding inside him. Catherine joined him later that night in one of the palace sitting rooms, where a fire crackled quietly against the cold. She wore a soft expression that carried both worry and relief. She asked if she did something wrong, Catherine said softly, taking a seat beside him. I told her no. I told her we are the ones who must do better. William nodded, swallowing the ache rising in his chest. She will heal, he said, though the words were as much for himself as for her. Meanwhile, in Windsor, Charles reflected on the day's events in the solitude of his study. He spent long moments staring at a photograph of Charlotte Helena taken several years earlier, a candid shot captured during a family walk. Her expression in the picture was animated, eyes bright with curiosity, cheeks flushed with the rosy glow of childhood. The contrast between that lively image and the fragile reality of her present circumstances struck him with a father's guilt and a king's clarity. The monarchy had survived wars, abdications, scandals, and generational upheavals. But this was different. This was a reckoning with the human cost of an institution built on observance. Across the country, the palace's confirmation reshaped public understanding of what it meant to grow up royal. For many, the announcement marked a turning point, a sign that even the most rigid traditions could bend when the well-being of a child demanded it. Commentators remarked on the significance of a royal parent publicly prioritizing mental and emotional health. For a nation that had watched previous generations endure pressure and silence, the shift felt both overdue and quietly revolutionary. Charlotte Helena herself, shielded from the media storm, spent that evening in a calm routine. She read a book before bed. She asked when she could see her cousins again. She wondered whether her schedule tomorrow would include lessons or drawing, or perhaps a walk in the gardens. She did not know that thousands of people across the world were speaking her name. And for the first time in many months, the palace felt that perhaps, just perhaps, they could keep it that way. As night deepened over the royal residences, the future remained uncertain, but gentler. The monarchy had redrawn its boundaries, not with ceremony or decree, but with an act of protection rarely seen in its long, complicated history. And though the road ahead would require careful steps, one truth had emerged with undeniable clarity. The well-being of a child mattered more than tradition, more than expectation, more than duty.